Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, many thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design today. We're really thrilled to be joined by Oliver Heath and Tanja Künstler. Oliver Heath, everybody knows who are listening to this podcast. He is very much Mr. Biophilia. He runs Oliver Heath Design, a fantastic architectural practice, obviously, and he specialises in biophilic design. And I'm going to leave him to just briefly talk about what he does, as most people will know who you are. Tanja, though, thanks very much. It's the first time we've spoken. You're concept designer for Interface. Both have worked on this excellent guide, which I've got them both here. It's called Creating Positive Spaces by Designing for Cognitive and Sensory Wellbeing. It outlines how architects and interior designers can use biophilic design to support focused work. I'm going to put a link on the journal of biophilicdesign.com, so listeners, please subscribe. Yeah, well, many thanks for joining us today, Oliver and Tanja.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks. Looking forward.
Great, thanks. Well, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you work and what you do, please? Tanja, maybe you'd like to go first.
Yes, I'm working as a concept designer for Interface. I'm based in Germany, working for the DACH region, which means Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And I'm part of the European concept design team. We are like 20 people with a creative background. Myself, I'm an architect by education. And what do we do in our daily life? We support our customers, architects, designers, and specifiers on a project base to really find the perfect flooring concept for their individual project. This can be a very creative flooring concept. It can also be just a custom color. And obviously, also apart from the project base, we keep up with trends in architect interior design just to deliver the best consultancy we can.
Thanks. And Oliver?
Great. Yeah, so I'm the founder of Oliver Heath Design. We're architectural and interior designers, and we're basically researchers, designers, advocates for health and well-being in the built and natural environment. And we undertake a variety of different projects. So we spend a lot of time researching biophilic design, sort of evidence and research studies, and then we implement them into the designs. I'm also a biophilic design ambassador with Interface. So over the last 7 to 8 years, spent a lot of time traveling around the UK, Europe, Scandinavia, teaching architects about biophilic design, but we've also been writing a series of white papers, which is sort of what we have here. And so in those, we basically collate lots of knowledge and data and then look at how we can implement those and make those ideas really easy and accessible. And the point is to really kind of spread the word about the benefits of biophilic design, the kind of business case, but also to help people think more creatively about how they can bring it into buildings and the benefits it can bring. And then just highlighting amazing case studies. So it's been a very productive, fruitful, creative working relationship with Interface that's allowed us to unearth all this incredible evidence about how nature can enhance our lives and the buildings we live in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's when I sort of come across this guide, it is really great. I mean, you've held it up there, sort of creating positive spaces. It's a really excellent guide, and the way it's laid out and everything, sort of the visuals within it and stuff, it's really, really inspiring, and really easy to grasp as well. So if there's people listening to the podcast or watching the video cast and they've heard about biophilic design, they're not quite sure what it is, they might think it's a few plants or this kind of stuff, which is the classic response, but it's so much more, the sort of sensory elements, textures, sound, all the visual aspects as well, so which we're going to chat about and talk about. But I do recommend people to go to the journal of biophilicdesign.com, and I'll put the link on so people can download the guide for themselves. Obviously, this is a guide for architects and designers. Tanja, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the aim was behind the guide, please.
Actually, this fifth guide already is part of a series. We started in 2018. Correct me if I'm wrong, Oliver. Yeah, so
I've lost count of the years in the past 18 months. Actually, I have no idea where we are.
Yeah, but it's we have this really great series of design guides, and they look into how our space and how working environment specifically can enhance our well-being, and at the same time also help us to be productive and deliver the best we can in everyday life. And the first guide was about the well-being standard, and then we started to look into this biophilic theme in detail. Also with a community focus, and all this sits an interface in our vision to create positive spaces, which means we, as a flooring company, we are all only part like one building block of a full interior concept, obviously, but we always aim to not only look at the floor, but really to see the whole space and how it really affects people's well-being. And positive spaces means that space should contribute to the planet, so have a positive impact for the environment, but also have a positive impact on the people in there, so which means human-centered design, actually. And since architects and designers are our main focus group, this is why we address the design guide to this group, and specifically now the cognitive and sensory guide. I love it. It's really great. I was happy to present it already to some architects, and they were also really enthusiastic about it. It not only looks at our visual sense, which is always so present for us designers, but it really looks at all the different senses we have, and this makes it really rich.
I mean, and why is it important really now, Oliver, in your opinion? Why is it really important that people grab a hold of this copy and really grasp the principles of this?
Well, I think when we first started this guide, we were really looking and became interested in this idea of mindfulness as a practice. And that is all about how you shift the focus of the mind from worrying about the future to just being in the very present moment. And we recognized that this was a really important practice, and thought, well, actually, maybe it's not just a practice. Maybe it is also an approach to creating spaces that just keep people in the present moment, to allow them to sit and to focus and not get distracted. And of course, at the point that we kind of decided that this was an interesting subject, we didn't have any of the coronavirus issues. So at the time, we were conscious that, as a global community, we were essentially being asked to focus ever more for longer periods of time, with actually less opportunity to do so. We're constantly being distracted. We're overwhelmed by noise, pollutants. We're always sort of being drawn from one thing to another. And this is, I think, very damaging for people. They're damaging for their focus. It's damaging for their sense of productivity and overall stress levels as well. So, there are some shocking statistics, actually, about distraction. For instance, that 70% of employees say they feel distracted whilst at work. And when we do get distracted, it can take 23 minutes to get back to being at the task at hand. And when we're constantly distracted, it raises our kind of cortisol stress hormones, which means that we kind of get, quite tense. So this constant sort of issue of being buffeted from one thing to another, the constant notification of messages is really, really damaging. And actually, some of the research that we uncovered shows that simply having an unread email in your inbox and knowing that you've got it can reduce your IQ by 10 points. And over again, what we're seeing is that, we are a distracted generation. We've signed up for it, so we're willingly, opened ourselves to it, but it's there and it's not at all good. And I think fast forwarding 2 to 3 years to now, and the guides come out, we've got this issue of COVID. and the fact that people are working at home and they're managing to, control their environment. But as we slowly start to think about heading back into the workplace, we've got to start imagining what they're going to be like, recognizing that we're all under enormous stresses and strains, that we are distracted, that we are going to have to rethink the workplace. And this issue of kind of sensory thresholds and neurodiversity, I think, is really important so that we can create more open and accessible workplaces, places that allow people to sit and work, and to understand the general sort of mix of people and their sensory thresholds as well, and how we should be catering for them as we welcome them back in to this sort of hybrid working system.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on there about diversity, sensory overload. I mean, I didn't actually realize it takes you 23 minutes to get back to, when you had a distraction. I've got everything, pinged off, but when I had it all on all the time, it was just, it does. I didn't realize, but it does, doesn't it? Your brain is easily distracted. And I think that was one of the really interesting discussion points that you have in this report, in this guide, is, it's how you design to minimize those distractions, to help the users, the occupiers, you call them, actually use the space, and how you create an environment that's going to help them, help your staff to do that. I mean, Tanja, obviously there's a lot of discussion how to design for like neurodiverse groups, and obviously we all need different environments for at different times. I mean, what do you think are the main challenges that workplaces are experiencing right now?
Well, I think we already had this trend towards activity-based working for quite a long time. So knowing that not every surrounding is exactly right at any time, depending on what you work on. Now this really connects to the guide connects it now to the essential insight. And when we think about the post-COVID workspace, I think there are two kinds of work activities which are more important right now. And it's first of all the collaborative part of it, because if you can do your focus work at home, and then you would go to the office to meet your colleagues and to have creative meetings. So the working space as a brand hub, also important to communicate and to have this sense of identification with your company. So very collaborative and communicative space, but at the same time, not everybody has this great, for example, like me, I have this home office with a door I can close, and I do have kids at home, but they are out of the door, and which means that some of the people, they do have to go to the office to do their focus work there. So I think that maybe these two areas are more important. In our region, we see more and more big companies also introducing quiet zones or a complete floor, which is prohibited for mobile phones, and that you should be quiet there. And at the same time, enlarging the areas of the meeting space, have different kinds of meeting spaces, not the classic one with one big table, but it's very agile and flexible ones. So I do think these two aspects are more important right now, and maybe less important is like open space, hybrid areas.
Yeah. Do you, just as a random thing, and do you think workplace, like the directors of companies and that kind of thing, do you think they're interested in the aesthetics of a space?
Obviously, yes, they are, because if they are not themselves, they are because young employees ask for it. So nowadays, people come and want to see where their office is and how it looks like, and workspaces need to be attractive right now. So you have to look at it. It's just a business case.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting that 80% of our environments are understood through our visual sense. So I think that making that first impression is really important in the war for talent and attracting people to go into a workplace. But I think once you start to work there and you realize what the rest of these sort of sensory inputs are like, then I think those start to have a much greater effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. In the guide, I mean, I want to talk to you, obviously, Oliver, about the how biophilic design specifically can support sort of the neurodiversity in the workplace. And when I talk about neurodiversity, I don't just mean actually people who have, you know, who class themselves on that spectrum, but I actually mean for ourselves as well, when we do need to, you know, go to different areas and that kind of thing. I mean, on page, it's page 33 of the guide, and I'm noting it so that it pushes people to actually download it, because it is really, really good. You do have like the sort of biophilic perspective, and you have different elements. You know, you talk about prospect, and you talk about the colors, and you talk about biomorphic shapes, and I mean, it's really, really, it's laid out very, very simply. But I mean, can you maybe sort of just touch on a couple of the points and just sort of elaborate slightly on how, you know, different elements of biophilic design could help?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, if it's okay, I'd like to go back a little bit before, maybe page 25. I can't remember the numbers, actually. I'm not that clever. But I think it's important to recognize that within any group of people, there is lots of neurodiversity. So generally, when we talk about neurodivergent people, we tend to be thinking of people with kind of autism or Asperger's or dyslexia or some other sort of learning condition. And 15% of the population, approximately, are neurodivergent, but that's probably only because they're the ones that have been tested. You know, 30, 40 years ago, there would have been 0%. So the more we test, the more we're finding out about it. Now, for the rest of us, it's worth recognizing that we all sit on something of a threshold that exists between being hypersensitive, which means we kind of like get overwhelmed by sensory stimuli, and hyposensitive, which means that we actually crave some stimuli. And what's really important is that we better understand that there is a whole diversity, and everybody sits on the scale between being hyper and hypo. And it's much more complex than simply sort of character personality traits, such as the ocean model, or simply, you know, saying, well, they're extrovert and they're introvert. Because actually, you can be extrovert, but because you're extrovert, you kind of listen into conversations. So you're sort of easily distracted by some speech. And so if you're an extrovert and you're working in an open plan space and someone's talking, you just can't help but be distracted by it. And equally, I think if you're introvert, you'll have different thresholds for different senses. It's not as if they all sit on a straight line. And I think what's really important is that we recognize that everybody sits on a line between those, and that we kind of design quite diverse spaces to meet people's thresholds. Now, actually, in our office, myself and one of my colleagues, Eden, did a sensory threshold test created by somebody called Dr. Anne-Marie Lombard. And what was really interesting was that it sort of really highlighted the different sensory thresholds that we both have. Now, Eden is quite an extrovert, but we found that actually she was very, very susceptible and easily distracted by sound and by the visual stuff, but she could deal with the sort of haptic and the kind of olfactory elements better. So she was actually quite hypersensitive. So she now knows that she's got to do something. She's got to go and put headphones on. But I turned out to be a little bit more hyposensitive. I quite like a little bit of a hubbub, a bit of noise, and I can deal with that much better. And I think that was really interesting. And essentially, you know, if you imagine you've got 100 people, you've got to design a space that's going to support all of those people, 15% of which are going to be neurodivergent anyway, but everybody else sitting on some threshold spectrum. And so the point about biophilic design essentially is that you've got all those people sitting on different scales. And the one thing that links all of those people together is that they all share a deep connection with nature. They've all had a positive connection to nature. And so by taking that nature first approach to the creation of spaces, you can actually have little messages or create spaces that communicate to each of them in different ways. And as like thriving, healthy spaces in nature that are, you know, biodiverse, we also need a diverse range of different spaces. So this idea of cueing in biophilic design is really important, because there are so many ideas within it that just help us to sit and focus and concentrate, to help us recuperate from stress, or to help us to kind of get back to being at our best. So things like non-rhythmic sensory stimuli, that kind of gentle movement we see in nature, is very, very good and calming. It creates what we call kind of soft fascination. It's very restorative. We've got sort of blue space theory about how, it's good to bring elements of nature in. The use of colors and what we call ecological valence theory. The ideas of how we can bring in natural light to support people's circadian rhythms, to get them to sleep better and feel more alert in the daytime. There are lots and lots of kind of concepts and theories underlined by biophilic design that I think are very, very beneficial to the workplace, to help people feel less stressed, but also more recuperated, knowing full well also that everybody reacts well to nature-based places, and it forms deeper connections to those places, but also the people in it, so we can enhance a sense of community whilst delivering this kind of diverse set of spaces, allowing people to move from one place to another, whatever their sensory and emotional and practical needs are.
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to talk about zoning just shortly, but one of the things I was reading in there, which was really interesting, and you sort of forget about it, in an open plan office or in a normal office, it's all very level, isn't it? It's all very, you just, you go from one place to another, you get through the door and you kind of walk into your office plan. But you make the point about nature and how you have different levels. So actually it stimulates your brain in a different way, doesn't it? It kind of takes you, it's not just prospects and refuge. This is about creating walkways and creating spaces. It's sort of intrigue, and it's encouraging your brain in a different way, because you talk also about the different senses actually, and you say there are 7 senses. I mean, like we all think the ones we know, but there are another 2, 3. I've lost count now. It's visual, the sight, auditory, hearing, tactile, touch, olfactory, smell, gustatory, obviously taste, vestibular, which is the balance and sense of gravity, and this proprioception, which is the position of the body in the space, derived from sort of the muscles and joint feedback. I mean, that's incredibly fascinating. And when you read it and you think, well, of course it makes perfect sense, but unless you process it and think about it as designers, as an architect, when you're designing a space, you can get really creative. I mean, architects listening to this, and designers, you think they can just create some beautiful, beautiful spaces, including like using different flooring levels and things. So yeah, I think it's really, really interesting. I mean, maybe we can just talk a little bit about the workplace now, and then sort of obviously hybrid working looks to be the sort of pattern that we're all going to be following really now. I mean, you obviously touched on it just recently, just about sort of business case, but maybe you can both just say, why should companies, in a nutshell really, why should companies be using biophilic design really right now?
First of all, it's proven that it enhances not only well-being but also productivity. So it's a business case. We have the lovely Human Spaces report. It's a great study which shows that you can enhance well-being by 15%, but productivity by 6%, and reduce absenteeism, is it right? I hope it's the word, by 15%, which is really incredible. So actually biophilic design is great. And when I said the collaborative focus of the workspace right now is more important, I think this community idea is even better, and nature enhances our community sense for community, and we can create spaces that help people to be better teams, to work easily together, to communicate better by introducing natural patterns, natural themes, and I also think that the whole sensory experience nowadays is a great opposite pole to the digital world. That's why I love the design guide right now so much, as now we have all these different digital meetings, and we're also used to use electric devices. But if we want to be the workplace and an attractive place to go to, not because the company tells you have to go there, but you really want to go there, then it can be great if you really have a sensory experience there, which cannot deliver a Teams meeting, for example, but you have spaces there which really, like attract all your body and all your emotion. And so that's what I think is the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree. As Tanja mentioned, there is 30 years of evidence and research that demonstrates that different elements of biophilic design can reduce negative costs, things like absenteeism and staff turnover, but improve building outcomes, things like productivity, creativity, and engagement with others and spaces. And I think going back to that point you made about the senses, if you imagine for hundreds of thousands of years, our senses were vital to our sense of our ability to survive in very harsh, dangerous conditions. And so our senses evolved in nature. And we were always, aware of the sound of a snap of a twig, because that would have come from somewhere, or the smell of rotting flesh, or the taste of fresh or stagnant water. So all of our senses were fundamental to our ability to survive, thrive, and flourish for hundreds of thousands of years. And then we've moved from rural dwellings and into city centres, and our senses have completely changed, from the Industrial Revolution onwards. And now, think about our senses. We navigate through cities looking at our phone. People just walk around with their headphones on. They're not at all aware, as I know every day when I cycle around the city. The sense of balance is somebody else's responsibility. It's all about health and safety now. So our senses and our relationship with them are very, very different. But think of all the opportunities that we have as designers if we were to embrace those and think, well, what does a creative space sound like? What does it smell like? And is it different to the space that you might want to sit and do focus work? How much adaptability, flexibility, how much sort of moving around do you want people to have? So I think it's a really exciting opportunity to recognize that, as human beings being part of nature, we evolved and our senses evolved in nature, and that we still have that ability to use those senses to create better places that are more diverse, richer in experiences, and quite different, I think, from the spaces that we possibly have at home. I think what's important right now is that we do find ways of creating desirable, aspirational spaces that offer more, that draw people away from their home, from their focus work, to getting back, to putting them into a positive, open, optimistic, happy state, encouraging them to go into buildings, to meet and talk and share ideas. Because once you start talking and you share ideas, and amazing things can happen. Just a simple conversation might share an idea, a skill, a resource, and from that, well, that's how innovation starts to happen. And I think right now, we need new ideas in all areas of our lives.
It's really important, that's where ideas come from, through collaboration and getting together. And if you can create an environment where people are going to want to come back, you can then create those ideas. You can create the solutions for the world we're living in right now, which is in a bit of a pickle. In the guide as well, you have 2 case studies. You talk about the LinkedIn offices in Paris, but also the Allegro building in Warsaw, I think. And they're both really quite different. The Allegro case study, there's lots of plants. It's quite soft. It's a sort of place, when I was looking at the photographs in the guide, thinking, actually, I fancy, I would love to work there. That's somewhere I'd love to go. The LinkedIn place, not so much, interestingly. It seemed quite it's quite geometric and slightly harder, but you can see the biophilic design elements in it, which I found really, really, really intriguing. Maybe you could sort of just talk about that, because in both of those, and this is one of the important aspects, I think, of the guide, is that you do you stress really about the importance of zoning areas. You both spoke about it, about how we all need different areas for different types of work, whether it's collaboration or quiet work, focus work, encouraging creativity and collaboration and things. I mean, maybe you could talk about either, both of those case studies, or would like to focus on one.
Well, I think what both have in common is that they really show great the concept of the cognitive and sensory approach, that you have those areas where there is a lot of communication going on, there is buzzy spaces and very lively, and we work with different colors, with bold colors, with contrast, with a lot of things going on. And then, like it gets calmer and calmer, and then you end up with those very nice and, very calm spaces, only reducing to very limited sensory input. Maybe I can say something to the LinkedIn one, which might be the more difficult one to link to, but what I really like about this one is the local flavor. It's a very French taste there. I think you can see it in this cafeteria space in the meeting area, which has the idea of a French bar, and they work with hard surfaces, so you can really imagine it's quite loud there. I guess I have not been there, but I guess so. But it's very typical for a French bar, so it has this local flavor. And there is also another one showing some glass walls, and there's also some visuals on there which are very French, and so I really do like this aspect of the project, because I always think a local flavor is always great.
I like that. I saw the Parisian lady on the those glass panels. Lovely. You're saying the sort of local taste, kind of like anchoring it in a space kind of thing. So what about you, Oliver? What's your take on these?
Yeah, well, I think what's clear from both of them is they've taken this very human-centered approach and tried to understand that sense of diversity of sensory thresholds that exists within these, quite large sort of work groups, and then use that sort of understanding to implement a series of quite diverse spaces that offer people quite a lot of choice, recognizing that some places want to be more lively, more stimulating through all the senses, not just the visual, but also the way they sound, maybe the way they smell through the offer of sort of coffee or fruit juices, or maybe different plants and sort of sensory inputs, but also the haptic quality and the kind of sense of balance that one needs as one moves through the spaces across different surfaces. And so what the spaces show, we're sort of thinking about the Allegro ones, is the initial kind of high threshold spaces are buzzy. They've got bright colors. There's lots of kind of like things going on. It's kind of more chromatic, blacks and whites and shots of green and other shots of color. And then as you move from these high threshold spaces through to the medium threshold, they start to become a little bit calmer. There's places for people to sit. You can have conversations, but there's also little rooms where you can go off to one side and have a little sort of, online call. So it's offering people a little bit more choice to limit some of those sensory kind of inputs. And then it moves right through to some of these much more calming, focused spaces, whether it's just sort of places for sort of one-to-one meetings that use natural timbers and natural materials, which we know reduce heart rates and blood pressure levels, but also these kind of very wonderful, calming recuperation chill-out rooms that actually sort of cut back all the colors. They're just very dark, they're very calming. You can control the lighting levels, and the kind of the input with blinds. So there's lots of things to interact with. So that opportunity to have choice, but also adaptability and flexibility. If you've just been staring at a screen and your eyes are feeling really exhausted, just turning the lights down, closing the blinds, and just listening to calm music and reducing that amount of kind of visual stimuli, the acoustic stimuli, lying down and kind of changing your body posture. It's really interesting to see that you can actually quite easily go from high threshold to low threshold, and it doesn't need to be that complicated. It's really about understanding people's different physical, mental and emotional and practical needs throughout the day.
I think that's you've touched on that point. You've got these three different sort of levels, really: the high, the medium and the low sensory thresholds, which we didn't actually sort of discuss at the beginning there really. But again, people are listening, if you go to the guide, it's put in a really simple way. I think it's around about page 42, 43, that kind of thing. But you sort of talk about the visual comfort and acoustic comfort and the tactile comfort on each of these different thresholds, and you give ideas of how you could create those different zones within a workplace. I mean, even if you've got quite a small environment, actually, you can still create 3 different very strategically placed zones that will encourage people to move around as well. But to create, I mean, just make it really, really simple for people. I think it's a really, really excellent guide. I mean, I really do. It's like a kind of one-stop shop for biophilic design for architects. It's a good place to start, to start learning and to kind of grasp it, and also for taking it to people you're trying to persuade, the sort of, the guys with the purse strings, and I mean that guys and guysesses, guys as in, sort of mutual multi-gender kind of thing. But I mean, is there, anything else you'd like to add? There's one thing I would like to talk about, actually, just as a thing, but you can then talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. One of the things you say is about sound, how you don't just put sound like, just don't have it coming from like piped randomly, but you could create, you put sound maybe low down or maybe high up. So as you're walking through a space, it actually feels more like nature. You do get like, bird song, like, the little robins around your feet. And then you get, even like birds in the sky or whatever, or you get raindrops and clouds and, the sound of water. But to create that stereo system, really, I mean, things that you probably don't, people don't think about, but if you've got the opportunity, everybody's got like little iPod things and little tiny things, you could create a really beautiful zone that people could control themselves as well, so but yeah, I mean, that was one of my things that I was really excited about, actually.
I think that idea of thinking much more carefully about our acoustic environments is really important, and it can happen in part about the materials we have, whether we've got LVT or carpeting on the floor will soak up the acoustics or make them more live. So thinking about those acoustic zones, I think, is interesting. And when we talk about acoustics, it comes down to how do you stop it being so noisy and jangly? But then you can also go beyond and take, well, what would a biophilic approach be? Well, of course, nature is never silent. Yeah. And if it is, something's wrong. So basically, if there are no birds tweeting and there's nothing going on, something is up. So we like to kind of think, well, how would sort of nature create a space where you feel happy, calm, and relaxed? Now, I was in Japan a couple of years ago, and I was working with a company there who had created this sort of multi-level, 3-dimensional acoustic system, where basically at ground level you could hear water. So they put speakers under the desks, and you could hear water coming from the ground. And then as you sort of walked around, you're like, birds, I can hear birds coming from up there. And it was really interesting. It was just sort of very simple sort of 2-layer speaker system that as you moved around the space, sat down or stood up, you got different sort of frequencies or volume of that. So I think what the guide starts to suggest is that we can play around with sensory inputs in a much more creative way to create more diverse experiences, which of course more diverse experiences give more choice, but it also creates much richer general experience of architecture, rather than just thinking, here's a room, you all sit in it, you do a good day's work, and that's it, you go home. But, we're going to need to work harder than that if we're going to be hoping to attract people, to retain them, to keep them being productive and creative, and to make sure that people feel that their needs are being met.
Absolutely.
And I think this is really a great example that the biophilic approach is so generic, because it's just natural. It is our heritage. So all of us respond positively to bird sounds, for example. And I think I do have a positive response to my favorite music, and Oliver has as well, but we might not have the same favorite music and so on. And so, but really it's like this biophilic design concept. They bring us all together because it's just natural.
That's lovely. I mean, really sort of on that then, sort of the final question that I ask everybody on the podcast, and Oliver, you've already been here. So, but if you'd like, I don't know, Oliver, if you'd like to give us an update on how you'd, as a kind of, in a magic brush of biophilic, what would a biophilic design workplace look like?
Well, I'd like to sort of maybe reframe my answer, because I probably spoke about this last time. But I think what is really important is that we consider the needs of a diverse workspace and diverse workforce as well. So giving people choice and option, remembering that essentially as human beings, we evolved in nature. Our senses were key to our survival, and our senses are still key to our experience of space and place and the way we react to them. So giving people choice, giving them diversity, giving people flexibility and adaptability is a slightly different shift on how we should be applying biophilic design principles, rather than just saying it's all about shoving a load of plants in there. It is much more about those spatial experiences and how we translate and communicate those and give people the opportunity to be happier and healthier by feeling that they're close to nature in the many spaces that we live and work in.
What about you, Tanja? What would the workplace look like for you? If you could brush any workplace, every workplace with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
Well, obviously, the ideal workplace would be in nature, actually, to like spend your process outside. I would also allow dogs and other animals in the workplace. I would love to do that, and then obviously everything Oliver just said. Like really play the full opportunities biophilic design is and. Yeah, obviously it's just a lot more than just plants. And I personally, my favorite sense is the sense of touching. What is it? It's the tactile one. So I would love to use a lot of different interesting materials, natural materials, yeah, because I think we're also tired of all these surfaces, not natural and slicky, and so that would be my perfect biophilic place.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.